Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Generative Edge, the podcast that keeps you up to date with the latest news and events in the world of generative AI. I'm Brandon Eychaner. I'm the Generative AI and Natural Language Processing Practice Lead for Deloitte Central Europe, and I'm joined today by Slava Petrova, a Senior Manager in AI and Data at Deloitte Central Europe, focusing on data governance and data management. Hi, Slava.
Hi, Brandon. So nice to be talking to you here today.
Likewise, thank you so much for joining us. So I'm going to start off on a really simple note. What is data governance?
That is not a bad question. I think it is very important to have good definitions in place because I feel everybody kind of comes up with their own explanations when they don't know something. So I really appreciate these opportunities where we can dive and go to the bottom of things and explain them in a very clear and simple way so that hopefully we can reach out to as many people as possible with this. I'm a firm believer in this. So when we talk about data governance, some of you may have heard of a framework that's called people, process, and technology. And this is kind of what we're looking at when we work within organizations. So there's always the people of the organization at play. There's always certain processes that organize them in a way and make them do things. And then there's technology that facilitates them executing these processes.
Okay.
I'd say when it comes to data governance, I'm looking at a three-pronged approach to explain it, and then maybe a fourth supporting pillar or approach. And so the first one, the people, it's when it comes to data, we're thinking of who owns particular pieces of data or data sets. For a lot of my clients, and I've worked in this area now for many years, it's always a problem. And not everybody is clear on their responsibilities. Maybe somebody is assigned to do something that's related to data, but that's not their main job, or somebody left and then, they didn't do the process right in terms of passing on responsibility for the data. So the first thing is knowing who manages the data, knowing who owns the data, and how these people are working together. And I think it's also important, besides the roles and responsibilities and them being very clear, it's also how we bring these people together to work on the data and managing the data successfully and effectively. And that's where we build organizational structures that can bring, people when it comes to just like enterprise level decisions, for example, for the data, or departmental decisions related to data, into councils or committees or working groups, so that we can, usually it's so much easier when people are together and they kind of iron out issues in the same room than when they're sending emails and it's one-off initiatives. So that's the first one. The second one is then when we have the people and the structures in place, how are they working together? And those are the workflows and the processes that we put in place. And that could be related to data quality. For example, we want to have processes with defining certain dimensions for data quality, that we want our data to be accurate or timely or consistent. And that those groups that I just mentioned, those people can be in these groups that define the processes and the workflows. And finally, we also need policies. So these are the guardrails that basically like make us comply with everything that people develop. And I think in the European Union, it's also very important to consider the regulatory frameworks and requirements. So this is kind of what I would consider data governance. And I said there's a fourth supporting pillar, and that is technology. So basically, you want to facilitate now the usage of data through some piece of software, usually that can implement these guardrails, such as the policies, that can have the rules around data quality, for example, in place, so that you can work more easily. But I think like you need to get the foundation to define these at an enterprise and departmental level first, the people, the processes, the policies, before you can go into a technology direction.
Gotcha.
So hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer for you.
Definitely, for sure. So my follow-up question to that would be, how do you communicate or educate the people who are building certain tools that use different sources, like data sources? So, public news data might be treated differently from the personal emails or from other personally identifying information. But all of this stuff can be used as contextual information for a software that uses generative AI to generate some kind of output. How do you account for all the developers and all the projects going on? Do you go out and educate them first, or do you have them come to you with questions about how to set up those guardrails? Because I assume that it's really complex processes, especially with data going in between different countries or different continents, even just to do one simple task. So, like, how do you handle communicating all that information?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, before me, you had an episode on data strategy, but I think that would be something fundamental that data strategy would apply or would
Mm,
decide. So we kind of usually we start, it could be top down or bottoms up, but the way that it goes is you would define the data strategy as the top level and at
mm,
an executive level, right? And like you have to think, especially if you're a global corporation, you have to think, how do I make this work for all of my subsidiaries in all of the geographic areas with all of the regulatory requirements that would be specific to each region and location.
mm,
And then you would kind of go down to a more tactical or operational level,
mm,
right? To start operationalizing at each of these locations. This is how exactly the strategy that we defined, the vision that we had on top would actually be implemented and operationalized. And
mm,
that is where, the developers that you mentioned or the people that are working with data, maybe like one off right now, or hopefully in some sort of organized manner,
mm,
could be brought in to communicate better and to be educated
mm.
on the policies, on the procedures that would be applicable to them in their specific area of work, as well as in their specific region from a regulatory perspective.
Gotcha. Okay. Have you already seen anything related to like the EU AI Act, for example? Because we work primarily in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I don't. To be honest, I'm a software developer. I handle mostly the technical side of things, but I actually don't even know when the EU AI Act goes into effect. I know that it was voted on and it passed, but I don't know the contents of that. So, is that something that you've already seen in your line of work? People coming with questions about the AI Act and how did they then what's next, basically.
As a data governance person, I was delighted to actually see data governance be one of the requirements for compliance with the
Mm.
EU AI Act that was specifically mentioned in there. So I feel very validated as a person who keeps saying that, data is the foundation and the most important thing that
Yeah.
you can be doing when it comes to development or AI projects and literally any product or,
Hmm. Hmm.
interaction with clients that you have. So data is indeed the foundation. And why it is important is, right, what you feed into your models. You want to make sure that it is high quality, right? You want to make sure that it is unbiased as well. And that is
Hmm.
an area I also focus on in terms of AI ethics, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
making sure that you strip away biases. So having the right, like I said, data governance, having the right people, structures, and processes in place, as well as the regulatory compliance, looking at the EU AI Act. If you're in the IoT space, there's also the EU Data Act. So
Hmm.
there's a multitude of acts that I think like started with GDPR about like 5, 6 years
Oh,
ago
for sure. Yeah.
that are all applicable to different areas of data and thus to, the products or the models that you would be churning out as a developer or somebody working in the AI space. So just
Hmm.
because you
Hmm.
asked about this, like what exactly is going on with the EU AI Act. So
Yeah.
it did kick in May of this year. So basically companies have 2 years to comply with it, starting from May of 2024. So that
Hmm.
is May of 2026. However, I did want to mention, so basically like what the act wants to do is for both users and providers of AI products or services, they want companies to, or these like users and providers to evaluate the risk of the AI applications that they have,
Hmm.
starting from minimal risk, low risk, medium to high and unacceptable risk.
Hmm.
And the thing is that even though you have 2 years to kind of figure out how exactly am I going to comply with the
Hmm.
act, for example, if you're a company, there is a requirement that if you identify any cases that are unacceptable risk and should
Hmm.
be forbidden, basically, you only have 6 months from May to comply with this. So basically, by the end of this year, companies should already know if anything that they use around AI is in this risk category of
Hmm.
unacceptable risk. So it is starting to really like gain steam and really get going. I have had clients clients that even last year, before it was officially put into place, were thinking about looking at where exactly are we using it, how can we structure our data to be supporting it. So it's definitely something that I'm seeing, especially in highly regulated industries such as financial services or life sciences and healthcare.
Gotcha. Makes sense. I actually wanted to ask a specific question about the AI Act because I know that there's this one paragraph that describes that certain limitations apply only to models that have used a specific number of computational operations to be trained. So they basically took like the number of, we call them flops, like the number of computational operations to train a model. And if it's beyond, I think it was like 10 to the 21st power or something around what GPT-4 requires, then certain other limitations apply. But I also see that there's lots of work being done on like model pruning and quantization to reduce the amount of complexity of the models so that they perform the same but are much smaller. And it's almost like there's this impetus for companies to make really, really efficient models so that they can sort of get around some of those regulations. Have you heard of this or have you thought about it at all? And how does that play in with like ethics?
Yeah. So honestly, I am more of a data specialist than an AI specialist. So I
Oh, sure.
think, Brandon, you and I would make the perfect team because
Yeah, for
you're,
sure.
a lot more specialist on the AI side. But I think like from a data perspective, right? Like we need to have curated data sets that are fed into the models. And specifically, I think it's a great opportunity for companies to think what is just like from a values or mission or ethical and moral perspective, what defines us as a company and what kind of data would we want to have into these models, because that would really define us. For example, if they're defining any product that would be based on AI, would provide services to their clients through AI, that would be fundamental because it is a great opportunity for them to exactly like think of this North Star, and that kind of also feeds into the data strategy space, but think into what defines them and how can I put this into all the models and ultimately all the products that are reaching our clients to make it a better experience for them and to, really carry our brand forward.
Gotcha. Okay, I have one last question, actually.
Sure.
Earlier, you mentioned mitigating bias. So, going through the process is not necessarily for training a model, but just in the data governance perspective, mitigating bias that exists in maybe documentation or something. Do you have any concrete examples of this happening, where you did an exercise and you found bias somewhere in one of the, I don't know, data governance structured documentation pieces or something, and then had to change it in order to mitigate that bias?
So no, and I wouldn't say that you would find it in the documentation, potentially
Mm,
at clients. Usually what I would develop would try to be stripped of the biases and would
hmm
pass an ethical, I guess, like evaluation. But of course, like when we go to clients, we don't know what we're going to find there.
hmm
And
hmm
so there needs to be always an exercise where we look at the current state
hmm
and evaluate how things are, what documentation they have in place. Do they even have documentation in place?
Good
And
question.
of course, then evaluate if that would really be fit to be used forward, especially
hmm
with how things are developing today in the present world with the technological advancements. So sure, that should be one of the exercises that happen.
hmm
I did have a client who just like not maybe related to the specific like AI use cases that you're so used to, but like I said, I'm more in the data space. So in the data quality aspect, for example, we were thinking like if something would be defined as accurate, for example, if you're defining the metadata of how we spell names, well, for example, they're
hmm
Native American names that may be spelled differently. So
hmm
we just had to account that for all possible cases, regardless of what we're used to, we accommodate all kinds of names and writings and spellings so that that is not considered an error, for example, but is something
Gotcha.
that that goes through. So there's certainly those considerations from my end, from like the data perspective that can be addressed by different companies, again, depending on the types of clients or people that they work with, because obviously that's more of a North American example that I
Awesome. Okay.
gave.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay. Thank you so
Mhm.
much for that answer. So, as somebody who typically works with the more technical side of things, I actually learned a lot today. Slava, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It was a pleasure.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Join in next week on the Generative Edge. And remember, generate responsibly.
Thank you for listening to The Generative Edge, a Deloitte Central Europe and AWS production. Your hosts are Brandon Eychaner, Vyasaraj Kulkarni, and Donovan Spronk. Our show is executive produced by Stephanie Cohen, Vanch Luthra, Ian Masters, and the Deloitte studio in Prague. Head writers are Stephanie Cohen and Brandon Eychaner. Our sound and audio engineer is Wojtek Krasa, who also serves as our editor and videographer. Michal Trusina is our graphic designer. Our marketing and social media managed by Stephanie Cohen and the Deloitte studio in Prague. And our theme song was written and produced by Jakub Vlašek. Don't forget to rate and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.